Have you ever wondered what lies behind the majestic halls and fragrant gardens of the Ottoman Empire? Imagine a world where young beauties in velvet robes were not just court musicians, but living symbols of power and opulence, where every smile concealed secret intrigues, and behind each respectful bow hid unspoken vows and fateful promises. What bound two young favorites of the Sultan to sinister orders that made the palace walls tremble? Why did dazzling festivities turn into quiet captivity for them, and the delighted whispers of guests transform into whispers of denunciation? In this video, you'll hear stories that never made it into official textbooks, about boys whose tender voices once echoed through palace halls, yet whose names gradually disappeared from the records. You'll see how love and loyalty collided with the ruthless laws of morality and political reform, and how, beneath a facade of endless beauty, forbidden passions and tragic destinies were born. Stay with us until the end to learn about the daring escape of two lovers and how European reforms forever altered ancient traditions, plunging into the darkest and most shocking depths of palace history. Scandal, fear, and secrecy pulse through every word. Are you ready to face the secrets of the Ottomans?
Picture yourself walking through blooming alleys of a palace garden, breathing in the scent of roses and orange blossoms. Here, beneath the shade of marble columns and the rustle of fountains, hides a world almost no one knows. Behind the glittering facades of imperial palaces and the gilded tents of sultans lie quiet chambers where, instead of courtly ladies, very different pupils lived and learned in serenity. They did not study sacred texts or military strategy. They were taught the art of seduction, the music of soft sounds, and refined manners capable of capturing even the sternest vizier's heart. These boys, chosen for their extraordinary grace and beauty, were barely 8 years old when they were brought inside the palace gates. Here awaited their new home, spacious halls with vaulted ceilings, carved wood crackling in fireplaces, and mirrors in which every gesture shimmered with special brilliance. From dawn to dusk, they practiced poems and melodies, perfected their manners, learning to hold a delicate porcelain cup so only warm water would stream out, and to bend in dance like reeds in the wind. They were taught to read the signals in guests' eyes and to guess what hid behind a polite bow. But the luxury and pleasant lessons masked a deeper purpose. The boys were living ornaments of the court, symbols of limitless power and wealth. When the Sultan passed by, they lined up by the columns, and their soft voices sang hymns glorifying the ruler. Their presence told European ambassadors and Eastern emirs alike, "Our court is so great, we can afford to keep an entire legion of youthful artists of devotion."
And yet, behind those polite smiles and exquisite garments, something fragile hid. Every boy knew, the moment the patron's interest faded, he would lose his privileges. Instead of wide halls and silk sheets, there would be drab corridors behind high walls, where he would be reminded of his true place. Losing his seat by the fountain, a young favorite risked ending up in a forgotten room, where only a rare servant might bring a cup of water in the morning. Meanwhile, palace life roared on. A vizier debated the appointment of a new pasha. Taxes were collected in caravans from distant provinces, and the boys stepped onto balconies to admire the golden dome of a temple reflecting the sunset. Their world was tightly guarded by eunuchs, silent sentinels whose eyes missed no movement. They ensured none of the favorites secretly left the court and protected secrets never meant to pass through the high-arched gates. Yet it was here, in the quiet of blooming flowers and eternal harp chords, that a whole universe was born, where innocence met the art of allure, and virtue and curiosity breathed in unison. This hidden garden of wonders knew no limits in its possibilities, where the power of charm would clash with the harsh reality of political games. Deep in the palace, where parquet floors echoed with the footsteps of ancestors, began the selection, a subtle craft reserved for masters of allure and scholarly aesthetes. Young candidates were brought from all corners of the empire, from the arid Anatolian foothills to the green valleys of the Balkans. Their faces were studied, their features examined. Symmetry was prized, slightly raised cheekbones, and a gaze full of innocent curiosity. Those who passed the inspection were sent to tutors of speech and music, where the real examination began. Each had 6 months to master the most elegant melodies on the oud, feel the rhythm of dervishes, and recite poetry in Nazim meter without stumbling over ornate turns of phrase. Those who succeeded received a new name, a sign of passage into the privileged circle. No longer little Ashkam or young Hassan, they were granted titles evoking beauty or virtue, joy of the court, the sultan's mirror, tender voice. They were gifted lavish attire, velvet caftans embroidered in gold, ultra-light stockings made of Italian cotton, and wooden-soled slippers adorned with the Hamza, a talisman against ill will. Each step on the carpet was a test. One had to move so as not to crease the fabric or make a sound. True choreography worthy of a royal stage. But alongside academic learning came a more personal set of lessons: how to give compliments without crossing into familiarity, how to smile appropriately even in tense moments, and above all, how to keep secrets. The eunuchs who oversaw their training would advise, "Your smile is a weapon, but the art of silence is your greatest shield." They were taught that the court was a stage where sincerity could become a trap and trust might quickly turn to betrayal. And the boys understood. They were to wield these arts not for pleasure, but to retain their place in a world where beauty outweighed birth, yet wore away against the brutal edges of power. After grand receptions, the youths entered the private world of palace festivities. Here, peacock feathers glistened beside flickering lamps, and the scent of saffron mingled with the sweetness of Eastern fruit. They stood in the shadow of columns when the Sultan approached, their light voices harmonizing with the bows of servants, every movement part of a grand performance. They were expected to be perfect, a tilt of the head, a raised brow, enough to captivate a guest or draw a breathless whisper in the hall. But the true test came behind closed doors, in royal antechambers where power met emotion. Here favorites learned to sense the moods of viziers and nobles, to keep conversation flowing on any topic, from agricultural reforms to nuances of Persian poetry. They were entrusted with secret tasks, to deliver a sealed scroll under the cover of night, or escort a distant envoy from Crimea, all while remaining invisible and drawing no suspicion. Their skill in gently influencing hearts and minds was highly valued, though those same talents could be turned against them. A careless phrase could end a career,
and banished them to silent quarters where time passed in stillness and thoughtless despair.
Many envoys, including the famed Venetian Benedetto Ramberti, marveled at the size of this guard of beauty. He wrote that in some palaces, hundreds of young men lived at once, whose sole purpose was to be the joy of the Sultan. Their training, he observed, never paused, and their status was measured not by rank or title, but by their ability to offer aesthetic pleasure and a flawless, obedient demeanor. Yet within this world of admiration lay deep fragility. The moment the ruler's gaze shifted to new favorites, the former ones lost their value. Some, deprived of protection, found comfort in secret bonds with one another. In exchanged glances and quiet touches, genuine affection arose, not staged, but fertile, and always under threat of discovery. Every such encounter was under watchful control. Servant spies reported the faintest hints of romance, and the Sultan at times responded with harsh decisions, sending those who crossed the line to lessons in passionlessness or far-off garrisons where expired hopes lingered. In time, the palace began to echo the changes outside its walls. Europeans brought not only silk and fine wine, but new moral standards. Under their influence, questions of emotional freedom began echoing more frequently in council halls. And it was there that the turning point emerged, when the splendor of the Guard of Beauty would crash into the harsh reality of laws rewriting the rules of the game. Soon, the breath of change loomed over the palace's opulent tents. In reception halls, the voices of European diplomats grew more insistent, speaking of progress and morality, subtly challenging the court's familiar ways. At first, these were merely polite remarks at gatherings, then official reports, agreements and recommendations from reformers bearing codes and statutes. And so, in the narrow corridors where once the laughter of young artists rang out, whispers began of illicit attachments and public order. Less than half a century later, a new imperial law was passed. Now, idle entertainments contrary to decency were punishable by imprisonment and fines. Eunuch law enforcers patrolled the streets surrounding the palace, while lists of people caught in indecent behavior were hung on house gates. Eunuchs, once silent guardians of secrets, became informants, whose reports opened the gates to the dark dungeons beneath the palace floor. For those who once shone in the marble torchlight, an era of trials began. Many former favorites were cast out of luxury into drab official quarters, where their only comfort was the memory of former attentions. And still, despite the threat of severe punishment, some could not forget the glances and tender words once exchanged here in the heart of the great empire. Because true loyalty and sincere attachment know no bounds of palace walls nor decrees of law. With the arrival of new norms came the darkest act of the palace drama. In the 15th year of the new indecency law, the official silent curtain fell on all once permitted relationships. The streets no longer rang only with the clink of crystal glasses and light laughter of performers. Now came the clatter of guards' hooves and the thud of court drums. Men accused of idle passions were banned from appearing in public for years, and their names were erased from court records as if they had never existed. A few brave souls dared to challenge the new order. The story of Tahir and Tib, whispered about for years, reached its final chapter during this time, when the two young men, once chosen by the Sultan, found themselves on opposite sides of the law. They did not flinch or turn away from each other. After arrest and humiliating abuse, they managed to escape custody and flee the palace walls in secret, where they were met by old friends and even Christian admirers who had once been charmed by their youth and pledged unconditional loyalty. In a single nighttime tent, where all courtly footsteps had faded, they pledged to guard their love no matter the decrees. But beyond the theater of the court and outside the eunuch's protection, a new battle began, not for the Sultan's favor, but for the right to feel. Exhausted by endless flight, Tahir and Tib turned to jurists and sages, hoping to find protection in the ancient laws of Sharia, where once love without coercion was not seen as shameful. Their appeals pierced the dense shadows of bureaucracy, and only a few elders dared to remind the court that the human soul always stood above written articles. Over time, the resistance of these illusions of justice met the persistence of European missionaries and reformers, and gradually, by the early 20th century, the old palace traditions were reduced to memories in rare manuscripts and private letters. The splendid halls where once the laughter of young artists rang and lovers' glances met turned into museums and libraries, and the guard of beauty gave way to new ideals, educated officials and generals whose stage required no external refinement. And today, through the lens of these forgotten pages of history, we find not only the grandeur of the Ottoman court, but a universal lesson. Even under the weight of the harshest bans, the light of attachment can pierce through stone walls. Where power seeks to dictate the boundaries of emotion, feelings still find a way. In secret letters, in exiled friendships, in the rebellions of hearts determined to defend their right to love. What do you think of this hidden side of a great empire? Was it a sign of progressive understanding of intimacy, or merely a beautiful mask concealing a chasm of vulnerability? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe so we can continue uncovering more forgotten tales from the most hidden corners of the past.